Hi there, this is Mar Brunet with QBrush.com. In this chapter we're going to be focusing on the hip area, so the pelvis area. And we're going to go into a little bit more details here and adding shading. And then we're going to be talking mostly about the butt and the hips. So how to construct that properly, and how to how this works when there's actually sort of the 3D element added to it. Because so far we've been working with mostly just lines and flat values. But what does that look like when you look at this with a light source sort of attached to it? So what I'm going to be doing is kind of simplifying all those shapes on the side here. So I'm going to start with this one here, so the front view, because it's the easiest to understand. And I'm going to be simplifying everything. So this section here first is what I'm going to be looking at. So basically, if we do something like this, so that would be, you can imagine this is a sort of a cylinder, but seen like straight from the front, so it would look like a rectangle instead. But we're still gonna add the shading, the proper shading to this, only at the bottom though. So it's as if it's like a half cylinder. So you'd have something like this, and then you add two more cylinders that are kind of intersecting, with this one. So, maybe one cylinder will be something like this, and let them start a little bit outside. So you have one cylinder here, another cylinder here, and they kind of go through each other. So let's draw this out like this. Erase what we have in here. Then I'm gonna add the shading to those two other cylinders, just like we did with the first one. So I'm doing this rough, but you will get the idea. Alright, and now we're gonna shade everything. So we're gonna shade the inside here. Oops. Take a soft brush. We're gonna shade the inside, shade the outside. So now you're starting to see where I'm going with this. This is pretty much what you would have to think about when you're shading this region right here. So it's two cylinders like this that are intersecting with another cylinder, like another half cylinder, and then you get this kind of shading. So you have dark here, and then switch to a different plane for the legs, and so you would have this kind of shading going on. So I'm gonna try to do this on the actual character this time. Let's see what this looks like. So we're gonna start the shading. So we're gonna basically copy this whole thing. So you have shading here, down here, and then as you go, it gets softer and softer and softer, and then it disappears. And then we have shading on the sides here, as if those legs were big cylinders. So I'm using a soft brush right now, but you can really use any kind of brush you want. Sometimes I like to use, actually most of the time I like to use a my square brush, because I like the painterly look a little bit more than the soft, like perfect look. Yeah, so now that we have kind of like our base shading, now you'll see why I had all those guides for the muscles drawn in initially. So this is where it kind of starts to fade away, and as we go over the entire body, those really strong lines like this one here, those are all going to start to disappear. So now that I know that, there's a change of plane here, because this is one muscle group and this is another one, I can start to work with that. So I'm going to erase it at this point here. Now I'm going to refine the shading. So this was the very rough shading, so that we understand the different planes going on. But now I can refine this and go into a little bit more details, because it's not as simple as just being two cylinders. We have something like that. So it's a little bit softer. And then we add a little bit of highlights. Not too crazy, just a little bit. To really show what the leg volume looks like. Alright, so it would look something like this. So I'm not gonna do the the legs and the torso at this point. We're really focusing on the pelvis area. So I can emphasize maybe the abs a little bit, and then soften everything so that it's not too visible, just a little bit. Alright, so it's starting to look pretty good. So you can see here, you still get like the hints of the muscle, but since we've been painting over it a little bit, it's starting to kind of disappear and be a lot more subtle, and that's kind of what we want. So that would be pretty good for legs, and so this area, like the crotch area, it's pretty good now. So now we're gonna move up just a little bit and then see what we do with the hips. So as we said, we have kind of like the hip bones that are right here, and you also have the obliques that are kind of going right over that. So depending how muscular you want the character to be, you might have like a bigger bump up here to emphasize the obliques. But in our case, we're just gonna focus on kind of the bones that are right here. And what this looks like is kind of like this. So you add a little bit of shadow underneath the hips. And something like that. Now here you can fade that a little bit. It's not as intense. So let's add a little bit of highlights for the hips, because the tip of the bones, if we remember, it catches the light a little bit more. Because the tip of the bones, the sides here, the sides of the bones, they sometimes can be very pokey, depending on the particular female build. Sometimes you're not going to see them too much, but I like to emphasize them just a little bit. As you can see, it's still still fairly subtle, and there's a lot of trial and errors. Depends. So with each brush stroke, she gets skinnier or fatter. So you have to be very careful, not overdo it too much. So that would be pretty good. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of shading here for the abs to get a nice transition, and to emphasize kind of the volume of the stomach. So this is a little bit more like it. And then kind of have this break here, this change of plane. So that would be a pretty good hip area. So I'd be pretty happy with this. So as you can see, it's just it's this thing here that we've done previously, and then you just refine based on the real anatomy that we also worked on previously. So, and for the back view, I like to do exactly the same thing as we did in the front. So I like to simplify all the volumes to down to super simple geometrical shapes, and kind of like this. So here we had cylinders. For the back view, we're gonna extend a little bit, so we're gonna kind of do this whole section, because one kind of lead into another, so it's important. And the way I simplify this is, so the back here is going to be one plane. So let me copy that over. Okay. So, as I was saying, so the back, I'm going to simplify everything on this side here. So the back is going to be one plane like this, angled like this. So imagine that the light is coming from the top. So kind of something like, you know, something like, oops, something like this. So here, since the back is kind of arced, so you look at it from the side view, it would be like this. So obviously if the light goes, you know, it's coming from the top here, this section here is not going to get lit, but this will here. And that is this section right here. So we can think that everything's going to be a little bit brighter here. So this is all one plane. And then when it gets to the butt cheeks, you kind of have like two spheres. So we're going to go and draw two spheres for this. Something like this, very simplified version of it. And then cylinders for the legs. Again, so something like this. So if I erase everything else and we look at what this looks like once it's super simplified, now suddenly makes it a little bit easier to understand and to be able to shade. So the tricky part is always, you know, when it comes to time to shade your character and add shading, highlights, shadows. It's that this is the part that, you know, that doesn't work most of the time, and it's just you have to learn how to simplify everything like this, and then once you're able to just look at the entire body, you know, as a bunch of like simple shapes like this, and it becomes really, really easy to shade, because everybody can shade a sphere. You know, if you have something like this, everybody is able to shade that. It's not that hard. You go just like this, erase, you know, soft erase, and there you go. I just shaded the sphere. So super, super simple stuff. And same thing with a cylinder, except it's just elongated, so it would be kind of the same thing. But you stretch it like this. There we go. We have a cylinder, and you know, you can do that with cubes also. It's just as simple. So the idea is this. So, you know, since those are really, really simple to shade, try to get your body down to a bunch of, you know, simple shapes like this. So we're gonna do what we just did now. So we're gonna shade the legs here as if it was just cylinders. So we're not worrying about all the different details, different muscles in there. Just consider it just two super simple cylinders, just like that. And highlights on the side, not highlights but shadows on the side. Do the other leg as well. Alright, there we go. So we're gonna do the same thing with the spheres for the butt cheeks. And then you see the, you know, the back plane here. This is kind of fading into the spheres here. So, you know, in this intersection here, this region here, you're gonna have kind of a fade between the sphere, the top of the spheres, and like this plane here. This seen from the side, as we know, it's kind of just like this, and then you have the spheres. You know, from the side view, this is kind of what it looks like, and then the legs here. So you have yeah, like a sphere shaded like this, and then at the top here kind of just flows into just a plane. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna shade the spheres. Really easy. Add a bit of highlight here. Highlight on the other side too. And as we said, it kind of just fades into the plane for the lower back portion. So, you know, roughly this is what a butt would look like. So now we have a little bit of work to do to, you know, to improve this, but yeah, I mean, this is what I think about when I shade, you know, this area. So now we're gonna refine it. So we're gonna, you know, think about the muscles a little bit more and finish this thing off properly. So it's mostly just adjusting where the connections start and end, and adding a little bit more details to some of the areas. So here, when you get to the top of the behind, you kind of have this diamond shape, and sometimes it's going to be a little bit more pronounced, sometimes it won't. That just depends, depends on the anatomy. So some people will have like dimples here and some won't, and when you have the dimples, it kind of emphasizes that shape a little bit more. And then at the top here, like at the top of the diamond, you kind of have the spine that starts to show a little bit. So this is where you can kind of fade in, fade out this region. So the back begins to curve in that area especially. Alright, now it's starting to look a little bit better. And the final highlights I like to do is, I'm going to draw it in red, but it's kind of like something like this. So this region here is kind of like flat on both sides. So here you can see it a little bit more from this particular angle. So like this thing here, like this line here is pretty flat, and this is that region right here. So this should be pretty flat also, if the other side is flat. So gonna make that the same kind of shade. So a little bit of highlight. And our butt is going to be complete. Yeah, there we go. So obviously, you can spend a little bit more time on this to make sure that everything is a little bit softer, because right now it's a little bit rough. But yeah, overall it'd be pretty good little behind. So in the end, I like to have this little highlights here to really separate the planes properly. So when one plane leads into another one, intersect like this, I like to have like sort of an emphasis of the highlight here. So this is not, this is a little bit too much, but I like the look that it gives. So the same thing here, you have one butt cheek, then it curves towards the inside, kind of like this, towards the inside, and then the other one begins and curves towards the outside. And when they connect in this area here, there's a big change of plane. So you have like from one side here, it's much darker, and then the other side here, where the plane changes, you have the little bit of highlight there. Alright, so now that we have something pretty good, from this side here, we're not going to see the hips too much, but as I said, this is kind of like the planar, like the flat region, and that includes like the side of the hip here. So the shading would look something like that, and then it would all curve back in the front here. So if we look at this from the back view completely, so what we can do is draw another butt. So we're gonna start simple. So if you're only focusing on this region, you can start really simple. So as I mentioned in the previous chapter, you can just have like simple lines to define the outside of the area, and then you have the butt crack, and then the butt cheeks, and then the legs, the center like this, and then we're gonna shade this. But first, we're gonna tweak the outside. So obviously, those lines are a little bit too simplistic right now. As we remember, we have one point where the femur connects, so the head of the femur is right here, and then you would have kind of like a peak right here, and then a little bit of a peak up here also, where the hip bones sort of poke through, and then in between you have the sort of like the little valley here. So I'm gonna add that in, make sure that we draw this properly, that we have a nice silhouette. Okay, so it's a little bit more like it. So from the back you would have something like this, and then I'll draw the beginning of the back a little bit. So if we look at this region here, this is kind of what happens right here. So the big change of planes. So everything here would be kind of more in the shades, and then everything below that up to about this level with the thing starts to curve down. That would be in the shades also. So if we start with this, already we're starting to look like something decent. We're just gonna add a little bit of highlights here, where the butt cheek ends and where the leg cylinders begin. Maybe not too much, maybe a little bit less than that, something like that. And then where you have the dark lines here, let's add a little bit of shading around that area. Again, we emphasize here the change of planes with exaggerated highlights. And then we kind of, blend that together a little bit so that the transition is a little bit nicer. And we remember we have the diamond shape right above the crack here, so it's something like that. And then that tip of that is the beginning of the spine. Not the beginning of the spine, but where the spine kind of starts to dig into the back. Below that, not too visible. It's kind of like still flat, this area. And then here, up here, it starts to become more like this. Right here, it's kind of just flat. Not much of a curve. And then what this means is that we can add a little bit of shading here, so to emphasize that diamond shape. So like this. And then of course on the sides here, we're gonna have a little bit of shading. And we remember that we have the flat areas that are kind of like right here. So on both sides here, this would be flat. So this corresponds to this area right here, and this area right here. So we want to make sure that the shading is flat in this place. So something like that. Flat, flat, flat. change a plane right here again. Make sure we emphasize that. So as you can see now, the light is not coming directly from the top. It's kind of like angled a little bit, like this, just to help us define the shapes a little bit better. Now we emphasize our diamond again, change the plane, and at the edges of the diamond. So here it goes from curving like this into kind of like a flat plane, and then up here it curves again on the outside. So what that means is that here you're gonna get most of the light, this intersection on this side, and here is going to be a little bit darker, and same thing on this side too. So now the diamond is a little bit too obvious, but you get it, get the idea. And now we can fade the top of the back here nicely, and this gives us a very nice behind. So we could, spend a lot more time on this and refine it even more, but we get something pretty cool. In the next chapter, we're going to be focusing on breasts this time around.